You are listening to All In, a podcast dedicated to helping you fulfill the mission of God in your life and around the world. I'm your host, Jeff Roper. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of All In. I am so glad that you are with me today. Today is going to be a good day for you, trust me. One of the people I have long dreamed of interviewing is on the podcast today. It's Dr. John Goldingay. Professor Goldingay is professor of Old Testament at Fuller Theological Seminary. He lives in Oxford, England. He's a prolific author. In fact, if you go to his Amazon author page, it will take you 6 pages to go through all the books that Amazon lists. How he writes so many books, I have no idea. His books include an introduction to the Old Testament, a reader's guide to the Bible, reading Jesus's Bible, Do We Need the New Testament, as well as commentaries on Psalms, Isaiah, and Daniel. His 3-volume Old Testament theology is outstanding and highly recommended by yours truly. And I've also enjoyed your translation, Doctor, of the First Testament. Really enjoyed reading that. And his most recent book is The Theology of Jeremiah, which I am reading right now. In fact, I have Dr. Goldingay. This is not to try to flatter you, but I think last time I counted, I have 18 or 19 books of yours that either in a digital or print volume. And so this is just really a great opportunity. I'm glad to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us.
Okay.
The thing I'd like to explore with you is first of all, you're an Old Testament scholar. And how did you get so fascinated by the Old Testament? I mean, to write as many books about it as you have written, how did it capture you so much?
Well, I can tell you the answer to that question, but I'd rather tell you the answer to a different question.
Okay, you're the guest.
There are a number of reasons that were partly coincidental as to how I got into the Old Testament. But that's not why I'm interested in the Old Testament now, which is a different sort of matter. Because the reason why I'm excited, why I continue to be excited about the Old Testament, is the way in which it keeps speaking to our ordinary lives, to the reality of God in our lives. Mm-hmm. And I'm much clearer about that, as it were, in the second half of my life than I was in the first half of my life, when I actually sort of fell into coming to be interested in the Old Testament. Do you see what I mean by the difference?
I do.
But here's a little bit of answer to your other question, which was, well, one was that, sorry, this is a terrible thing, but I did Greek at high school. So when I went to university to do theology, I didn't need to do Greek because I'd done it already. So I'd got space to do Hebrew. So I got into the Old Testament that way. And I was inspired by a couple of kind of guys who became mentors. One of them was an Irish guy called Alec Mattia, who's written on the Old Testament, and who was a great preacher on the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. And the other was a guy called John Baker, who eventually became a bishop in the Church of England, who was a great lecturer on the Old Testament when I was an undergraduate. So it was things like that that got me into it. But as I say, that's not what's kept me into it. Mm-hmm. It's the way it speaks to our lives. And I think particularly because I'm not sure whether you know that my first wife had multiple sclerosis.
Right.
And she was ill with that for 40 odd years. She died 11 years ago. And so in my own relationship with God and God's dealings with me, the key question all the time was dealing with the fact that my wife had got this terrible illness. And the terrific thing about the Old Testament is the way it relates to the realities of life.
Now, would you unpack that a little bit for me? I know you've written a book about that particular journey. Tell us, how did you find the Old Testament to be speaking so specifically to your own anguish and your own process and the mysteries of life that you are having to encounter?
Well, one answer to that question it lies in the Psalms. That the Psalms invite us into a relationship with God which has fantastic openness and confidence about the way that we talk to God about things. It's kind of amuses me, but saddens me quite a bit, really, that Christians Christians in theory believe that God is their father, but they don't actually feel very free about the way they talk to God.
Right.
And the funny thing about the Psalms is they don't talk about God being father very much, but they relate to God with the kind of confidence of children who can be confident about their father's power and their father's love for them, and recognize, as you do, well, you may if you're a child, but you do even more when you are a father, that that father often needs to have a bigger picture than a child, and that a child needs to both have confidence in the father's power, but also trust the father when the father doesn't behave the way that the child wishes it would, and all that kind of stuff kind of helped me a lot with Anne, really.
That's great.
Another one that's kind of related is that which I'm thinking about now, because I've recently written a commentary on Ecclesiastes, and got to love Ecclesiastes years ago during Anne's illness, because the terrific thing about Ecclesiastes is that it's got no clue what God is doing.
Right.
And it's, in one sense, it's not okay about that at all, but in another sense, okay, he's God, I'm not. So being able to think about God in the way that Ecclesiastes does has been important to me.
That is so good. I hate to confess, but for most of my Christian life, I never liked the Book of Psalms, and I think it was because all of my training and thinking had been from much more of a philosophical and analytical and linear, very Western process. And then a number
It's funny you being Elim. That doesn't fit with what you're supposed to, with what you are, does it, spiritually? And
yeah, within
am I interviewing you, or are you interviewing me?
I know. Yes, within our tribe, you would think it would be better, but I suppose I was one born out of due season. And then what happened was, I eventually got convinced I should actually engage with Psalms in a better way. Mm-hmm. And so I just started, I don't even know where I got the idea, but I would just read two pages every day, read them out loud as a prayer.
Oh, yeah. It's great.
And I started doing that several years ago, and it was transformative. Every human emotion is expressed there. And I never thought about it like the way you just said it, about how it is demonstrating how God is so secure we can say anything to him.
That's great. That's a good way to put it.
He doesn't get rattled by our temper tantrums and our angry little outbursts. So,
but I was the same as you with the Psalms. When I was about age 20 or 25, I thought the Psalms were a waste of time. And why do we have to? Because I'm a Church of England priest, right. So we're always saying the Psalms in services. And I thought, what a stupid thing to be doing. And then I discovered
the richness and the beauty of them. Now, how do you find time to write so much?
Well, I 7:15, I make the tea, and my wife and I pray. And at 7:45, I get up, and at 8:00, I sit where I'm sitting now, and I sit and write until my brain gives out at about 5:30 usually. Will that do as an answer?
Yes, I suppose it's the old writer's adage: put your behind in the seat. Put your bum in the seat and put the words on the page.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, it's not just a time. I mean, as you've implied already, and as I've implied, I love the Old Testament.
Yeah,
and I love the privilege of being able to study it. And I love the privilege and the vocation of trying to be able to help other people understand it. So I don't have to drive myself to come and work at it, because it's something I love doing.
Well, and that really does come through in your writing, because even though it's of the highest caliber academically, it is also very personable and very real. You when you read, like as I'm reading this Theology of Jeremiah, even though it's, I think it's written more to a popular audience. It's not as much a academic, maybe like some of your more academic commentaries might be. But I'm reading it, and it's like, this is very rich and substantive, but you can tell you've engaged the text at a personal level, and that always comes across in your writing. So I think that's part of that. Your enthusiasm infuses the writing, and so
That's fantastic if it does, yeah.
now, when I was in graduate school, I received my master's in leadership, and we read a lot of books, we read a lot, listened to a lot of lectures, and all of that stuff. And there was one article, one 4.5 page article that we all read that we still talk about to this day. In fact, I posted on Facebook to our private Facebook group, to our cohort that we study together, and we still keep in touch. So I'm going to be interviewing John Goldingay. What questions do you want me to ask? And it was a consistent one. Ask him about leadership. That article he wrote about, is leadership biblical? I don't know which book this is from. The professor only gave us an abstract from it, and it contained those 4.5 pages. And it just impacted, and I still think about it. I was reading it again this morning, that particular article on, is leadership biblical? Can you summarize for us kind of what your idea was behind that, and maybe how your thoughts have developed even more so in that area? Maybe they've changed, or maybe they've gotten deeper into that area, because I think it was very profound.
No, I can't. No, I can't. I mean, I don't know when I wrote. It was ages ago. I've written, umpteen things since then. And see, a proper scholar is somebody who, say, gets really into, you mentioned Jeremiah. They get into Jeremiah when they're aged 30, and they carry on studying Jeremiah till they're aged 80. I don't do that. I write something, and then I'm on to the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. So I'm vaguely aware that I wrote an article on leadership, but I can't remember what it says, and I haven't thought about it since. So no, you tell me what it says, and I'll tell you whether I still agree with it.
That's fair. That's fair.
I'll tell you some things that I think, but whether they relate to the article at all, I don't know. I mean, I think that that in particularly American, maybe Western, but American generally, culture, we think leadership is really important. It's one of those secular world things. And one of those many ways in which the church thinks the same way as the world does, without realizing that it's just something worldly. We think leadership is really important. I don't think the Bible thinks that way, really. And the ineptness of some of the people that God chooses, Moses and people like that, the people who quite often will admit that they're inept. It doesn't matter, because God is actually the guy who's in charge. The whole way of looking at how things get done for God's people, and what God's role is, and what the leadership's role is just not one that we think in terms of. So that's one thing that I think. Another is that I think within my lifetime, the way in which pastors spend their time has changed quite radically. When I was first ordained and worked in a parish, then the theory was that you would spend your time in your study. You'd be studying the scripture. You'd be going to visit people, things like that. You'd be studying scripture in order to prepare your sermon. Nowadays, pastors, as far as I can understand, are consumed by, I'm not criticizing them, but they are consumed by the demands of management and administration. And they prepare the sermon on Sunday night. And so the way in which pastors spend their time is so different from what it was some decades, and certainly some centuries ago, because they are compelled by the culture or by themselves or something to be managers, administrators.
Yeah, and I think that yeah, that captures something you said in the article,
Mm.
that if we learn more of a biblical way of, well, you pointed out that, you know, the community of the
Mm.
congregation, the congregations are led not by us, were necessarily led in the New Testament by a singular person.
Not necessarily, but not at all. There
Right.
is no example in the New Testament of a senior pastor
Correct.
or of the pastor of a church. There is not one example. Jesus, I think this is probably in the article. I mean, God gave Israel priests and people like that.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus did his best to abolish all that. And then after about 100, 200 years, the church reintroduced it.
Right. Now, and because you say it in the line in the article said something like, rather than that if the church would embrace this biblical way of expressing, we might sin, we might not accomplish as much, but we might not sin as much. And then you later said that we might reflect the new community of God rather than a baptized culture.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I thought those two were
Okay, that's good.
profound.
I like that. Who wrote this?
It was a brilliant guy. I read him in school somewhere. You know, because I've seen this many times, especially when I have to interact as more in the U.S. context. After 25 years of working in a more in a European context, where things are far more, at least in my circles, are far more collaborative amongst peoples. And the U.S. model seems to be even stronger on the individualistic,
Yeah.
strong leader.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that, you know, that idea of a leader, it seems to limit us. That, you know, it's like, it's not about us and what we're doing for the people. It's about God and what he's doing amongst his people.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
sometimes our understanding of leadership can get in the way of experiencing what God's trying to do in and through his people.
Mm. Mm. And it not only does it narrow down what God can do and what the congregation is, but it's toxic for the leader.
Yeah.
As we see, because we read about a scandal every month or every week in which some great Christian leader turns out to have been involved in some terrible kind of sin.
Yeah.
And it's somehow built into the process. It's very difficult to, well, not very difficult to avoid it, because there are loads of leaders that don't, but very, very easy for being put into a position of leadership to be something that destroys you. David's the great example of that in Scripture, of course.
Right. Right. Now, how would you, from all of your years of studying the scriptures and reflecting on the scriptures, and also I find it interesting, you are a priest within the Anglican community.
Yeah.
So that's an Episcopal government. The denomination I serve in, the U.S. Foursquare Church, is also an Episcopal style government. We have bishops, and we're all, you know, pastors are appointed. We have a strong senior pastor model. And so some of what you're saying is quite counter to the governance polity of both of our traditions.
Yeah.
How do you live that out within that type of community?
Well, Billy Graham is alleged to have said, you know, if you find the perfect church, don't join it because you'll only spoil it.
Right.
And nobody's going to. I mean, part of the answer is that with any church or denomination, there are going to be things you don't agree with. There are lots of things about the Anglican Episcopal Church that I think are fantastic. I love the liturgy.
Mm-hmm.
I love the fact that we read so much Scripture.
Yeah.
I love the fact there is so much praying in the services. I love the music. So there's lots about it that I think is really great. Its theology of ministry I don't agree with, but I haven't felt that was a big enough reason to make me leave it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a large part of the answer. I think for an English person, there's an extra nuance, which is that in England, to be Anglican is the normal way to be Christian.
Mm-hmm.
historically, it's the Church of it is the Church of England.
Right.
And so I used to think sometimes when I was in California about supposing I were here and I wasn't already an Anglican, what would I become? You know, what if I got converted through into varsity, as loads of people do, what denomination would I join? I don't know what the answer would be, but quite likely not the Episcopal Church. But it's partly for historical reasons that I grew up in the Anglican Church, appreciate so much about it, and don't feel that my disagreement with it is enough to make me want to leave it.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
It's also paying me a pension, by the way.
What's that?
It's also paying me a pension.
Oh, yeah. that does cloud the mind on some decisions.
I think I was saying, I suppose if I resign my orders, they'd still pay me a pension. Yeah, so okay, forget
that. Yeah, well, that's great because, you know, I've seen it happen numerous times where if leaders will simply slow down especially we as Americans, and you lived in America long enough to know how we act and think, we're typically very prone to action, not as much prone to depth of thought in that act. We just, hey, we got an idea, let's go do it. And then we'll straighten it up after it runs over a few people and hurts some people. But if we would slow down enough and engage enough other people, and that we would rather be stewards within the flock rather than leaders of the flock, I think that would probably help us in our leadership style a bit more. Your book, actually your translation of the Old Testament would translate the phrase in when it was referring to Moses, as you know, we typically know Moses was the meekest man on the face of the earth, and you bring out in both that article and your translation and your other writings that you said there's no exegetical reason to translate it that way, but rather he was the most average, or I'm paraphrasing you now, but it was like he was I think it was Churchill said of somebody else, he was a humble man with much to be humble about.
He was an ordinary guy. Yeah.
He was an ordinary guy. He wasn't the brightest light bulb in the house or the sharpest knife in the kitchen, but you know, we often put him up as if our brilliance is what's going to do it. When you're processing through the scriptures like that, how can you think of other ways that the Old Testament can inform us in today's world? You know, you look at the things you're going through in the United Kingdom, you're familiar with the cultural traumas that are happening in the US as well as in Western Europe and Eastern Europe for that matter. Are there ways that you would look at what the prophets teach us in the scriptures and the entirety of the Old Testament? How would that inform us if we would spend more time reading them?
I love Psalm 72, which obviously is a psalm, but it's not your average psalm, because it's about what it means to be the king. It's called a Psalm of Solomon or a Psalm for Solomon, and it lays it's a beautiful. You know how when Paul in Ephesians and whatnot is telling people, "This is the way I'm praying for you." Really scary to know how somebody like Paul is praying for you. Well, Psalm 72 is the equivalent of, this is how we're praying for the king, you Solomon. Can you hear us? Because he's there in the temple. This is who I pray for you. Yeah. What I'm praying for him is that he would be somebody who would, the expression that comes in that psalm, but also comes a lot in the prophets and in Deuteronomy, is that he would be a person characterized by justice and righteousness. But it's a lousy translation of the two Hebrew words. Because the two Hebrew words are words, one is a word that means governmental authority, and the other is a word that means faithfulness. And what the essence of what Psalm 72 and the prophets and Deuteronomy wants, by way of the way in which society works, is that the people with power, which can be within the family and can be within the local community, but is also within the nation, are people who use their power in a way that is faithful to God and to other people. And what I would kind of covet, if you like, for the new president is that they should take a commitment to using power with faithfulness particularly to the ordinary people. The psalm goes on about them. And a problem in Europe, I've been thinking about, we make a distinction between the first world and the third world, the majority world, or whatever we call it this week. And I think more and more that's a division within nations, at least as much as between nations.
Yeah.
That one of the things that the last 4 years have shown in the USA, but also the election we had last year in Britain shows, is the extent to which ordinary people have got left behind, and that inequality has increased and so on. And so ordinary people are not doing anywhere near as well. They aren't eating as well. They don't even got healthcare as well as they would have done 10 years ago. The expectancy of life in the USA has gone down in a way that in no other developed country has it done that.
Right.
And so the responsibility of the community, and therefore of the people with power, is to see that resources and power are exercised in a way that is faithful to God and faithful to people. That's what the usual English translations have got for. That's the meaning of what the usual English translations have got for what they call justice and righteousness. It's the exercise of power wherever you have it, in a way that embodies faithfulness towards God and towards people, and particularly towards the needy.
That is so good. Because I've been struck reading again through, especially the prophets. I've been rereading Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel quite a bit lately, and the concern they have for the weakest among us, the marginalized, the old English, the alien, the foreigner, the immigrant, those without political power and position that needed to be protected. And I think that's I'm wondering.
But that's not what I was talking about. I was talking about ordinary people.
Just the average, yeah.
The average, but the 40%, the people who are not doing. You see, you and I can see you've got bookshelves there and books. You've got curtains. You've got a door.
Right.
You've got some certificate up on the wall up there, and you can look at me and it's the same. You can see a picture. You can see some bookshelves. I had dinner tonight. We've got heating in our house. I just this afternoon was reading a story in the New Yorker. A report in the New Yorker about a woman in the States who died in her car because she was having a nap in her car in between shifts she was doing at 2 different fast food places, and she'd kept the engine running in order to keep warm, and it died of monoxide poisoning or whatever it is. Now, that's not the 5%. That's not the immigrant. That's not the Mexicans guys. Right. That's quite a high percentage of people in the US and in Europe who are not doing as well as people like you and me.
Right. That's really good. And I think that just becoming sensitized once again to that is critical. Now, of all the books, maybe you've already answered this, of all the books you've written, and if somebody wants to dig deeper into this and they don't know where to start and they were to go to look at maybe all of your books, could you recommend 1, 2, or 3 of your books and say, if somebody wants to really get acquainted with the message, what God's revelation through the Old Testament, this is what you would recommend?
Not really, no. They're all different. It depends what sort of thing you're after.
Okay.
That one on Theology of Jeremiah that you're talking about, there's
right.
a similar one, Theology of Isaiah, that InterVarsity do. Those might be quite a good answer. If it's somebody if somebody who doesn't know quite as much as that, then there's one called A Reader's Guide to the Bible, that InterVarsity do, which is kind of more basic, and that would be a good starter, really.
Okay, great. I also loved your book, Do We Need the New Testament? And how you pulled out all these truths from the Old Testament, and it was just fascinating to me. Well, I only have one more question for you, and I ask this generally.
That Do We Need the New Testament book is a good book for somebody like you, but not for somebody who's kind of starting.
Right. Right. Now, one more, actually, two questions. This one's a spontaneous one I've often wondered about. Your book, to Old Testament Theology, you have a 1-volume version of Biblical Theology, I think it is. Then you have a volume called, what is it called? Is it an Introduction to the Old Testament?
There is a book called The Introduction to the Old Testament, yeah.
And then you have the 3-volume series. Yeah. And I typically, in my devotional reading, I like to be reading something. And I was looking at those and I go, okay, now which one of those, what would be the highlight of, are you familiar enough with those to highlight what you would get out of them if you were to take one of them? I
remember writing those, yeah. Well, the Old Testament introduction one works through the Old Testament book by book.
Okay.
And it's designed not to give you all the answers, but to help you with the questions. So to give you a bit of background as to what the book of Joshua is about, and then it gives you questions to think about.
Perfect.
The Old Testament theology, the 3-volume thing, is giving you the answer. It's obviously on too vast a scale. It's too much of it, really.
Right.
In order to tell you what the first volume works its way through the Old Testament story to work out what the implications theologically are. And then it works its way through the faith of the Old Testament. Okay, in light of that, who is God and who are we and who is Israel and so on. And then the 3rd volume, called Israel's Faith, is about, okay, what does that imply about ethics and about worship and about prayer and so on. The biblical theology, as its name suggests, is attempting to stand back and do within 1 volume what the Bible as a whole teaches about what does the Bible as a whole then teach about God, or about the people of God, or about the world, or whatever.
Great. That's great. Now, this is the final one more question. I normally ask this of all of our guests. If we had a time machine and we could go back in time to your 25-year-old self, what advice would you give yourself?
Wow. Take guitar lessons.
That's a first. Particular reason why?
Well, the thought that's behind the question is a strange thing. When you've been around for a while, then okay. I mean, I love being doing what I do and all that sort of thing. But I realized that, as I've said in print, actually, I drifted into doing what I'm doing, and I could have been all sorts of other different things. Probably, I wonder whether I could have been a therapist. Actually, what I should have said just now is I could have been a drummer. I think I'd have been a better drummer than a guitarist. I could have been a rock journalist. I could have been something entirely different from what I am. And I know that with regard to, I mean, I love music. I know that I could have done more with music and with other aspects of my life than I did. But the problem is you can't do everything. I mean, I'm entirely happy with what I've done.
Right.
But if I could live my life again, and they said to me, and you can't be a pastor or a professor, then those are the other things I might. Okay, then I'll be a therapist. Okay, I'll be a drummer.
Great. That's fair. Well, Dr. Goldingay, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy life to take time to sit down and talk to me in our audience for a little while. I certainly do appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Bless you.
Hey, before we go, I want to remind you that you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. Also, I'd like to encourage you to share this episode on social media or through email. Get your friends and family involved if you think it'll help them. And finally, if you benefit from this podcast and or you believe in our ministry of making disciples of nations by developing healthy Foursquare church planting movements, would you consider partnering with us in prayer and even financial support? Go to my website, jeffroper.com, and you'll see the link there that says support our work. We would appreciate it. It helps make this ministry possible. God bless you guys. It's your life. Now go live it.